I just watched Don't Worry Darling last night, and I have a lot of things to say. Going into this movie, just like with any other movie I watch, I knew absolutely nothing. I had seen the trailers, but I never looked at the reviews, so I didn't know if the movie would be a masterpiece or just garbage. The only other thing I had seen besides the trailer was the remark Olivia Wilde made about the villain taking inspiration from Jordan Peterson, which I'll dive into in later parts of this review. I will have a section where I talk about spoilers, but I'll let you guys know ahead of time, and then I'll mark the timestamp for when the spoilers stop. But without any further ado, let's talk about Don't Worry Darling. Just before we dive into it, I want to mention that I've been sick this past week, so if I sound congested or not like my usual self, then that's why, and I thank you all for bearing with my voice in advance. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. Let's start with the positives of this movie. The first thing I will say is that Don't Worry Darling is a beautiful movie to look at. The movie takes full advantage of its setting, and it embraces the aesthetic of the time period that it is set in, and I love that. The cinematography is good, not groundbreaking but good. The movie has a nice colorful flair to it, and even in some of the trippier scenes, I liked the aesthetic of this movie. Don't Worry Darling just looks really nice overall. The second thing I liked were the performances, and this is kind of expected considering how loaded the cast is. But Florence Pugh's performance really stood out to me, and it seems like she has played this kind of character before. Cough cough. But nonetheless, it's a great performance. Harry Styles does a good job too, and the rest of the cast is solid. Again, not groundbreaking or Oscar-worthy acting, with the exception of Florence maybe, but the acting overall is good. The last solid I will give before I rip into this movie is the concept. I'm gonna talk vaguely here, so if you've seen the movie, you will get what I'm saying, but if you haven't seen it, I'm not spoiling anything here. I actually really like the concept of Don't Worry Darling, and that might be surprising considering how polarizing this movie is right now, but I feel like the idea is cool. I feel like more could have been made out of it, and it could have been implemented better, but nonetheless a very cool concept that puts an interesting spin on the idea, so it's not entirely like something we have seen before. Also, now is probably as good of a time as any to mention that I have not read the book, and I won't be judging the movie on the book or how well of an adaptation it is. I will be solely focusing on the film. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the numerous problems with Don't Worry Darling. The first issue that I will talk about is that the first half of Don't Worry Darling felt a bit slow and it kinda dragged. The trippy scenes felt lengthy because the viewer has no idea what was causing the visions, and these scenes maybe felt a bit too frequent at times. But on a second watch, these scenes won't feel so long because the viewer knows what to look out for. Nonetheless, the beginning felt long, and sometimes I just wanted to cut to the chase instead of constantly being teased from scene to scene. The other issue here is that sometimes Don't Worry Darling feels tropey, especially in these trippy scenes. It's not terrible, but there are a few scenes where I knew what would happen because it was a trope. Not a super big complaint, but sometimes the beginning did drag. The second issue I will bring up, before I get to my real pressing issues, is just Olivia Wilde's comments about Jordan Peterson and how he resembles the main villain. Look, I don't agree with Jordan Peterson on everything, but I think it was an extremely unnecessary attack from Olivia Wilde, and it did lead me to starting my watching experience with a bad taste in my mouth. I think Wilde's comment was an unnecessary attempt to politicize the movie and captivate attention from liberal audiences. But honestly speaking, Wilde didn't need to say this and then alienate an entire group of moviegoers, and the main reason why I don't like that she said this is because it was so out of left field and unnecessary. On top of this, the comment is just straight up untrue. The main villain really has nothing to do with Jordan Peterson. If anything, throughout the movie, I thought the main villain's mannerisms and demeanor were a lot more in line with a Freudian Robert California from The Office. I'm going to get into a few spoilers here. If you haven't seen Don't Worry Darling and just want to skip to my rating, I'll leave the timestamp for that up here on the screen. Also guys, because this movie is brand new, I might not be able to find the exact scene to correlate with what I'm saying, but please bear with me because this movie literally came out a week ago. But nonetheless, here are the spoilers and my main complaints. Just to finish up on the Jordan Peterson point, I can see some similarities with both having a podcast for lonely men, but that doesn't make Peterson a villain at all that needs to be portrayed in a Hollywood movie. If having an online platform and talking to lonely men makes you a villain, then Tyler 1 is the modern equivalent of Adolf Hitler. So just a very unnecessary jab from Wild that backfired if anything, but I won't hold this complaint against the movie. I'll factor this benign comment out of my rating, and when we get to my verdict, I'll act as if I never heard it. Now the final and main complaint of Don't Worry Darling is plot holes. The film has so many areas that need further explanation, and areas that could have been explained better. There are also so many lingering questions about how the Matrix came to be, and why the runners of it seem to be complete idiots. Allow me to explain some of these complaints briefly. So the first thing is that some areas need more explanation. I'm a fan of ambiguous endings, but I think they should have shown how Alice's life is destroyed after she wakes up, and maybe they could have had a flash forward to show what remains of the Victory Project, to further emphasize how this masculine fantasy destroyed the lives of its unwilling participants. I don't think the ambiguous ending was as powerful as they thought it would be. I also wish they explained how they nourish the bodies of the participants who are involved. Like, are they fed through a tube and does this process appear in their simulated reality in some way? Also, I wish they elaborated on why it is that when someone dies in the simulation, that equates to them dying in real life. I'm assuming it has something to do with sensory overload, and I know they are copying off the Matrix here, but it would be nice to have some sort of an explanation. The last area that needs some major explanation is the children. How the fuck do they program actual human beings, and if they have the power to do that, then why not populate the town to make it less lonely? Okay, next thing on the docket is that some things could have been explained better. I am not a seasoned screenwriter, but some of the writing choices just seem stupid. An example of this would be that Frank decides to make everything classified, which just arouses suspicion. This is probably the dumbest decision they could have made in terms of presenting this new reality, because keeping things classified prompts people to investigate. Let me give you a relevant real-life example that we are all familiar with. If you were sneaking out of the house and your parents asked you where you were going to say something like you were going to a friend's house to study, or maybe you're going to visit your grandparents. You are never going to say it's classified or I can't tell you, because then your parents are going to be prompted to investigate you. The same goes for Don't Worry Darling. Imagine how many questions for the wives would have been cleared up had the Victory Project presented itself as a nuclear energy program, for example. That would have solved the question of why the world shakes from time to time, along with giving a valid reason to stay the hell away from the headquarters because it's filled to the brim with radiation. But instead of this, Frank decides to be a complete idiot and to keep things under the wraps, which just prompts the women to want to find out the truth. The reason why this sticks out so much is because Frank is supposed to be some kind of a psychological mastermind, but instead he just comes off as a clumsy, poorly written villain. Also, why not have guns in the simulation? You're telling me in a simulation to satisfy American masculinity in a desert, there's no guns? Also, having guns would help stop situations with people who learn the truth like Alice does. Imagine if during that car chase scene, one of the guys pulled out a Smith & Wesson and knocked some sense into Alice. Okay, the last part was a joke, but if they had guns, that would have solved their problem with potential deviants trying to escape. And if they can apparently program human beings like we see with the children, then they could in theory have an infinite military tasked with protecting the headquarters to make sure no one comes near. The next plot hole that comes to mind is how Harry Styles' character originally is an American, and we see him use this accent when we see the real-life version of him speak. But when Alice finds out the truth in the simulation and Jack is trying to break the facade to calm her down, he still retains his British accent, which seems like an oversight. If he is trying to give the illusion of authenticity, then he should have definitely dropped the accent to show Alice that he is being genuine. Also, if the town is suspicious of Alice, then why do they not have her under strict security and surveillance? After they patch her up, they leave her unattended and never bother watching her, which seems ridiculous. They only respond to Alice after she kills Jack, but had she not killed Jack, she could have just snuck up to the headquarters again through the town bus since she's not under any surveillance. The common backstories that all of the women share is also bad writing on Frank's part because he can't be bothered to forge a more intricate backstory behind each person to make them feel unique and not warrant suspicion. Over time, people would eventually realize that they all have way too much in common, and this just points back to Frank's laziness. And as far as seeing planes go, how the hell do those get in the simulation, and why would they appear as if they are crashing? The only explanation given to this is that Alice probably heard an airplane in real life, which then conjured the image of one in the simulation. But this insinuates that Alice doesn't even have earplugs in, which means that whenever a sound happens around her real-life body, she can hear it in the simulation. The more and more I think about the simulation within Don't Worry Darling, the more of an idiot Frank becomes, and it begs the question, how the hell did Frank get a simulation running in the first place? There is more plot holes that I could go on about, and I just watched this movie last night, and if you give me more time in a rewatch, I could probably find even more. But these are serious issues that drag the movie down substantially. This movie feels like an eclectic mix of The Matrix, Truman Show, Get Out, and Dark City, albeit nowhere near as good as any of those films. Alright, now you've heard me rant about plot holes and stupid writing choices, let's talk about my rating for Don't Worry Darling. Despite my rant about the plot holes in this movie, I still appreciate the concept and the beauty of this movie. I think the Jordan Peterson comment was an unnecessary comment and it gave some people a bad taste before even watching the movie, but like I said before, I won't factor it into my rating. Don't Worry Darling has a solid cast, good cinematography, and a decent story that only falls short because of some major writing oversights. These plot holes drag the movie down so much because had this script been ironed out a bit more, I think the movie could have been much better. Like I mentioned before, the concept is really cool to me, it's just the implementation is highly questionable in certain areas. I'm giving Don't Worry Darling a 2.5 out of 4. I think this movie is worth your money because it is a fun ride, but it's not as revolutionary or unique as it sets out to be. This movie is really just provocative, and if its goal was just to get people talking about it, then it accomplished that, although that's not necessarily a good thing. Guys, that is all I have for this video. Please let me know your thoughts over Don't Worry Darling in the comments below. I love reading through what you guys have to say. I am a small channel, so all the support you guys provide really does mean a lot to me. And as always, if you made it this far, thank you, I love you, and I genuinely hope that you have a great rest of your day.